Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest Service Department News webinar. Today, we are going to be talking about ESG and specifically ESG for operators, how they can incorporate best practice into what they do. My name's George Sell. I'm editor of Living here at International Hospitality Media. I was the founding editor of Service Department News, and we are a multimedia online platform for the service department, apart hotel, and extended stay sectors. Our sponsor for this webinar series is the Residents, and we are going to watch a short video to find out a little bit more about them. Okay, thanks to the Residents for sponsoring. You will be able to see contact details and the website for them in the chat. There's going to be quite a lot of information posted in the chat today, actually. Today's discussion is going to be about 45 minutes, and then we'll have some Q&A. So if you do have questions for our panelists, submit them using either the chat or the Q&A functions excuse me, in Zoom. A recording of the webinar will be sent via email to everyone who's registered. And when we get to the end of the session at 3 o'clock, we'll leave it open for a couple of minutes so you can either contact the panelists or take some notes from all the information that my colleagues are going to be pasting there. So we've got a fantastic panel today. I'm going to ask them all to introduce themselves, and we'll go from left to right as we see them on the screen. So let's start with Lizzy. Good afternoon to you.
Afternoon, George. Thank you very much for inviting me to join the panel today. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Lizzy Coates. I'm a senior manager at Considerate Group, and we are a sustainability consultancy that just focuses on the hospitality and tourism sectors. And we work with a range of different clients, ranging from asset owners, investors, brands and operators across the UK, Europe, Middle East and the USA to really work to embed ESG and sustainability into their operations.
Lovely. Thanks, Lizzy. Sarush, good afternoon to you.
Afternoon. Thanks for having me today. I'll give you a quick intro and share some background about my ESG and net zero works over the last few years. I'm currently facilities and ESG manager at AES in the residence department. Before this, I spent several years in hospitality sector. Since September 2022, I've been actively chairing the ESG committee and initiatives, focusing a lot on sustainability. I must say before that we had already a good social and environmental practices already in place, but we never actually actively measure it. And so what we don't measure, we can't actually manage. Since 2022, we've been quantifying our emissions using greenhouse gas emission protocol standards, as well as our social values with TOM, national TOM, and we are accredited member of Planet Mark for both social values as well as corporate sustainability. We have solid core scope 3 emission data, as well as scope 1 and 2. And I must say our scope 3 is a great proportion. It's around 95% of all our emissions at the moment. We also have a clear roadmap and target and reporting line with SBTi for achieving net zero, hopefully. Overall, it hasn't been a very straightforward journey for us, I must say, and but transparency here is really important, and we always want to have a good quality data as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarush, and we'll definitely go into more detail on some of that during the call. Victoria, welcome to you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm listed there as director of a marketing agency, which is my day job. But the other side of what I do is I'm director and sustainability lead of a service department operator, a small service department operator in Cheltenham. We have 5 service departments. In December, we became the first service department operator to become B Corp certified in the UK, which was quite a journey for us, and lots of good things came out of that. We have quantified our scope 1, 2 and 3 data, and we are already sub 50% of the national average for emissions per overnight stay, and we're working to get that down significantly more. We are on course, hopefully, to be net zero by December 2025, and we then want to become a regenerative business so that we become climate positive as well.
Excellent, thank you, Victoria. And last but not least, Stephen, welcome to you.
Hi, George. Thanks very much for inviting me onto this panel. Yes, my name's Stephen Martin. I'm the CEO Director of ISAP. ISAP is the accreditation body specialist in the serviced accommodation industry. We've been doing this now for about 10 years. We have a number of accreditation and certification schemes, which are only available if you're a provider of serviced accommodation in this sector. We behave as a one-stop shop. We have a variety of different types of accreditations and certifications, but of course we can't be expert at all of them. So the core team deals with the regular quality, comfort, safety, security assessments and the accreditations and certifications that fall out of that. And we engage with expert partners when it comes to our security accreditation and our sustainability accreditation. So some of the schemes we offer will be relevant to this conversation, or less so, some less so. But of course, the sustainability one is something probably we'll be talking about later. So thank you.
Excellent, thanks, Stephen. Okay, let's, just a quick note, the LinkedIn profiles for our speakers are all in the chat. So if you want to make contact with them and carry on the conversation after the session, then by all means do so. Let's look at a few screen grabs from stories that we've run on Service Department News, just to give you an idea of some of the things that are happening in the sector. So as Stephen has just mentioned, the first story on the left there, the incorporation of a sustainability standard within the ISAP program. We are starting to see operators setting net zero targets and reporting on their progress towards them, such as the Super City story there. We're seeing agencies in the space, such as Situ, taking a very close interest in the ESG performance of their supply chain, their accommodation partners, such as the Situ story there. And I think we've got another slide of stories here. Yeah, so data and measurement is obviously very key to this whole program. We'll talk about that shortly. There are several different environmental accreditations out there. There's a story there about Fraser's using BREEAM in use, which is an interesting one, because that's much more related to the operations of a property rather than the bricks and mortar. And then there's the social side of ESG. So we've got rooms launching charity initiatives, and there are other things like this going on in the space, which I'll hopefully find out a bit more about. So let's kick off by talking about who is actually driving the ESG momentum within the sector, because I think there are several different players who are all pushing it, and they're all coming at it from slightly different angles. Lizzy, if we could start with you, perhaps you could talk a bit about the role that business travel plays in pushing this. I'm thinking specifically corporate travel buyers, corporate travel programs, and the kind of ESG tick box that buyers of corporate travel have, and how that reflects on what service department providers need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're right, there's been a big increase in demand from the corporate sector for ESG credentials among accommodation providers. And we're really seeing this in an increase in the number of ESG criteria that are being incorporated into requests for proposals, RFPs, for accommodation providers. And it really sort of, I guess it reflects a broader shift in the movement for more sustainable and responsible business practices across all industries, really. And the real sort of the drivers behind it, well, firstly, these organizations, these corporate organizations, they have their own sustainability goals, they have their own net zero targets, and they require their whole supply chain, including their accommodation providers, to operate in a sustainable way, and that contributes to the overall ESG performance of the organisation. Of course, we're also seeing an increase in regulatory compliance and pressure to report on ESG performance. And also, there's more demand coming through from investors and other stakeholders who demand more robust ESG practices, which includes the choice of suppliers that an organisation is using. So all of this sort of filters down to the impact upon the accommodation provider, the service department. There's also aspects to consider. So, for example, by choosing a supplier which has strong ESG credentials, it helps to mitigate risk. So against possible violations of labour rights, human rights, corruption accusations. And also there's an increased demand from consumers and employers for more sustainable business practices. So that's what's sort of shaping the reason why there's more demand now from the corporate sector for disclosure of ESG credentials. So essentially that means that accommodation providers now are having to go through quite a rigorous RFP process when it comes to the corporate sector. Sustainability certifications on the rise, because essentially sustainability certification helps to rubber stamp a company's ESG credentials and as a way of showcasing credibility through external verification. But it can be quite challenging for some accommodation providers to complete these RFPs and to have the data to hand and the skills in-house to be able to respond to these tenders. So it's a challenge, but it's becoming more commonplace.
You mentioned that the demands of the buyers are becoming more rigorous. Do you think they've kind of reached the level they're going to now, or are they going to become even harder to satisfy the demands of some of these buyers?
I think it's I don't see it kind of stopping. I mean, it's becoming more. I mean, ESG is kind of becoming almost an important differentiator now between accommodation providers, and I think as regulations tighten and it becomes more stringent, I think it could, yeah, potentially keep going.
Thanks, Lizzy. Victoria, as an operator, are you seeing increasing demand from the end user, whether it's a corporate travel buyer, whether it's an individual traveller? Are they drawn to you because of your environmental credentials, or did you decide to go down that route because you could see the demand coming from that direction?
So actually the motivator is mine and my family's personal principles. So we believe in ethical business, we shop through ethical business, we shop through B Corp, we do all of these things as consumers ourselves. So it felt like a natural first step that we would also do that. So we sat discussing, our property was retrofitted. So it's a historic property and it was retrofitted 2021, 2022. And when we sat having a discussion about what we wanted it to do, and the opportunity that we had in front of us, we decided that actually we would go down the route of, our very first step was to say that we wanted to deliver the most sustainable overnight stays in Cheltenham. That was our motivator. And that came from our principles and ethics. When it came back to it, it became very clear that there were lots of, you can have lots of knowledge as an individual, and you still don't have all of the knowledge that you need. So what we found was we pursued B Corp because it gave us a framework in which to operate. And we had absolutely, very transparently, we had absolutely no idea what impact that would have on us as a business and our profitability. We just knew that was something that we wanted to do. And actually, the impact has been massive. So really interestingly, unless we ask the people, unless we ask the individuals that are coming to stay with us or the businesses that are reaching out to us, the conversation of ESG doesn't come up very often, not explicitly. But that's because we have been transparent about what we're good at and what we're not, and because we've got the B Corp certification, and because that B Corp certification has then permitted us to list on, say, booking.com with level 3 travel sustainable, all of these kind of things. By the time they reach us, they've already made that decision that we are ethical, sustainable, have good governance, etc. And it kind of is a decision validator. But very interestingly, we have, so there are several huge employers in Cheltenham, and manufacturers, and civil servant organisations and things like this. And we have found ourselves placed on their RFP or RFQ frameworks with almost zero friction. So they've just kind of approached us and said, we've got someone that needs to stay, and then they've put us into that framework, and we haven't had to jump through hoops. It was a bit of a shock. We were just suddenly listed with this, and then we're getting guests in through that. And we also have independent tracking, so AirDNA and beyond, that give us the occupancy data within Cheltenham, and consistently we are tracking somewhere between 15 and 25% above the occupancy rate of other equivalent operators within our region. And the only major difference, you know, we're similar on price, we're similar on space, we're similar on amenities. You know, we're not city centre London where we've got parking at a premium or anything like that. We're just kind of a normal operator with very similar competitors, and the only differentiator is that we're B Corp certified. So we're not having those conversations with guests, but it's almost like by the time they've reached us, they've made that decision already. And that's been, you know, that wasn't what we did it for. We did it because I want to get up every day and say I've done the right thing in business. But it's been a wonderful side effect. I can't deny that.
Could you tell us a bit more about the B Corp certification and what it actually involved?
Yeah, it was an incredibly intense, very eye-opening experience that I maybe wouldn't have pursued had I known how much was involved at the beginning, because it became a bit, you know, daunting in the middle. But it is something I'm extremely glad we did, and it is something which is very, very evidence-based, and they have experts that are sitting there that are absolutely questioning you on that evidence. So there are things that we did that I was quite proud of, and we would submit it and they would go, yes, that's very good, but it doesn't actually meet this. And you'd be like, oh, I'd not really thought about it like that. It's hugely stringent. It made us shine a light on every single aspect of the business. So sustainability and environment is one part of it, but you also have to demonstrate with B Corp that you're keeping your customers happy. We scored full marks on that, which is unusual. But customer happiness, we did really well. You have to look at governance, so how we treat our staff. That gave us some things that we'd never thought about, and it wasn't that we actually weren't doing them, it was just that we weren't measuring them. So for example, we have a zero gender pay gap. That was because we just had a zero gender pay gap, but we'd never stopped and made that as a decision. But it got us to evaluate that. We've got a less than 1 to 3 ratio of lowest paid person to highest paid person, and most businesses are 1 to 8, 1 to 10, something along those lines. So there's lots of things that we were doing right that we just hadn't quantified, and then there were lots of things that we were doing, in my view, really well, but they have a differentiator between something called outputs and outcomes. And we were operating quite a few areas of our business very much focused on outputs, not outcomes. And that was quite a learning opportunity. And it pushed us further. It pushed us really hard. It took a lot of work to do. It is the best thing we've ever done. It was something where other certifications, we have pursued other certifications, but the other certifications are a validator. And that's not a bad thing, but it goes through and you have to fill in the boxes and you do say all of these things. B Corp, being so evidence-based, forced us to think in new ways, and it forced us to evaluate and challenge our thinking. And yeah, it was challenging, but it's been a brilliant outcome. And yeah, it was the icing on the cake to be the first one that was certified for the service department sector. But yeah, it's been brilliant. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's led to business that you weren't otherwise getting or otherwise expecting. So, you know,
100%. Yeah, definitely.
Sarush, you were saying on the call before we started that you guys, with the combined businesses are now operating 15 separate buildings. Are the owners, the landlords of those buildings, specifically choosing you, do you think, because of your ESG expertise? How high up their agendas is the ESG strategy of the operations?
I must say, there's still investors and also landlords, they're still blowing hot and cold on their views about ESG. I'm reading a lot of contradicting reports all the time about, you know, some people saying they won't invest until you have your CDP rating. And on the other side, there are some investors just, they just, after you making decent profit. So I think there should be, I mean, it's government that comes into play here. And I think this lack of legal regulatories and consequences here is a major thing. What I would like to add, if you don't mind, about the regulatories and the standards, obviously, that is that it's currently only affecting the larger companies, like CSRD in Europe or SECR in UK. These are mainly affecting larger companies, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't affect the smaller companies, because if you are then within the supply chain of a larger companies or agencies, then obviously you will have to have your at least scope 1 and 2 measured fully to be able to get back to the surveys that you receive. And if the operators haven't received surveys from agencies, then they should expect to receive within the next couple of months, I would say. But yeah, from the landlord perspective and investors, my opinion is at the moment there's a bit of a mix. But definitely it has been a perk for us to be a Planet Mark member, especially that we measuring our social values as well as scope 1 and 2 and 3.
Thanks, Suresh.
I hope that answered the question.
You mentioned that the agents are now also taking fairly rigorous inventories of their supply chain and assessing them all for their ESG criteria.
Mm-hmm.
Are the surveys that you're having to fill out for the agents becoming lengthier? Are they asking more questions?
So at first, when we were receiving these surveys, it was just a case of tick boxing whether or not we have this policy, whether or not we have, say, for example, social related modern slavery policies and all that. But as we go, they are getting deeper and deeper. They are asking for emissions per night for a stay, for example, and also a benchmark as well of how it was a few months ago and how it is now, to see where we are heading to and whether we are actually meeting our targets as well. So they are getting legs here, definitely.
Okay, thanks, Suresh.
That's fine.
Stephen, it's clear that this whole process involves a lot of learning and taking on a lot of additional knowledge that hasn't traditionally been at the core of an operator's skill set. What resources and knowledge pools are out there for people to learn about how to improve this sort of stuff? And what role does accreditation play in the process?
Yeah, you're right, George. I mean, companies providing accommodation, serviced accommodation specifically here, they are, you know, populating all ends, all parts of the spectrum, both ends and everything in between, in terms of how familiar they are with the requirements of ESG and other disciplines too. I mean, we come across it a lot with safety and security and quality and comfort. Companies are operating at different knowledge ends, if that's the phrase. So some will need more guidance, help, coaching, hand-holding maybe, before they're ready to position themselves better to show their credentials. So that there are lots of sustainability environmental awards to choose from, as has been alluded to already. So it's important for those who are, let's say, less down the scale in terms of developing their ESG credentials. It's important for them to engage with a scheme so an accreditation or certification scheme, that first steps are all about establishing where they are on the scale, working out what the gaps are, and there, in most cases there are gaps, and then working slowly to develop the action plan and move them slowly towards achieving an award. So the big difference is really how in how long it takes different companies to get to that point. And there's no right or wrong. It's just where you pick up where you are at the time. So I would say, in answer to your question, there is plenty of resource out there. There's plenty of help and guidance by companies running schemes to help these providers get this very intense batch of learning under their belts so that they can get these credentials nailed down. I mean, I looked at the word credentials, which is an interesting word, and I've come up with the definition, which it also means qualification, quality, and suitability. So it's actually very relevant, because what these companies are doing is that they're investing their time and money in getting themselves ready so that they have a qualification, it indicates quality, and it makes them more suitable to be selected by the corporates, the clients, generally the clients, whatever type they may be. So accreditation taken then to the next step, or certification, it's very important, because that's the thing that allows companies to differentiate, as you mentioned previously. It allows them to demonstrate that they are suitable to be selected. It helps provide integrity and credibility to those that achieve it. It elevates the perceived professionalism of the accredited company. And there are a good number of options available out there. We use an expert partner called Sanderson Phillips. I nearly forgot. Sanderson Phillips, SP, to deliver our own accreditation on sustainability. And they have a whole process of gradually encouraging people onto the scale, and they work through with them to get them to where they need to be. And in some cases, it's a 3-year engagement. But to go back to your original question, yes, many of them are at different places, but there is help out there to get people onto that scale so that they can be recognized.
So with your sustainability accreditation, and it's not a sort of pass-fail situation, it's a cooperative relationship where
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Contrary to some schemes we run, which have to be black and white. So, for example, safety and security. The ESG, the sustainability accreditation, is more consultative, collaborative, working with to get companies to where they need to be reasonably for the size of business that they are. So yes, you're right. That's the difference with this type of award. It is the way it's run. It's run gradually. It's understanding where the gaps are, and then putting a manageable action plan in place to fill those gaps. And as I mentioned, it can be a 3-year process depending on size and scope of the organization going through it.
Thanks, Stephen. We had a question in for Victoria about the potential profit increase from being a B Corp member, and extremely efficiently a very long answer in there, Victoria. So I think
sorry, I'm not very good at succinct.
No, it's great. I just wondered if you might want to quickly talk about that for a minute or two. Just, you don't need to run through the whole thing, but the question that came in from Laura was, what percentage of profit increase would you say happened due to the B Corp certification? And it's an interesting question, because it's not just the right thing to do, it's obviously paying dividends business wise. So perhaps you could just touch on that quickly.
It is, absolutely. Our big challenge is we opened that way. So although we weren't B Corp certified when we opened ESG led, which meant that we hit lots of the RFQ frameworks and the OTA levels without having done B Corp. However, that was just based on our own, like, look at us, aren't we great, was my concern. So we wanted the independent verification to say, yes, actually you are, you know, you are practicing what you preach. I was concerned that, you know, I might think that us having solar panels was being really effective and what have you, but we hadn't measured that. So for us, the B Corp, the motivator for that was the kind of verification of the things that we were actually doing. Which does mean we don't have historic data. So I can't look back 5 years and say our occupancy was X, our nightly rate was Y. We've been able to push that up by, you know, 20% and 50%, whatever those figures are. We don't have that. However, we have been able to list directly onto the RFQs of 7. I think it's 7, maybe 8. I was just trying to count on my fingers, of the local major employers. And I know that that has delivered at least 250 bed nights. Whether they would have accepted us without B Corp, I don't know. We weren't entering those conversations then, but it meant it was almost frictionless. I didn't even have to fill in, you know, I had to fill in the nightly rate, the rack rate, and the a few bits of information about us, and then write that we were B Corp certified, and through we flew. We didn't have to go through an extensive process, so that's been really beneficial. But it has also helped us to enter into conversations with our customers that have made some quite big changes to the organisation. So as an example of something, so post-COVID, we identified that people's need to feel safe and hygienic meant that small individual bottles of you know, shampoo and things like that were the preference, and that their expectation are that if they weren't used, they're still removed from the property and fresh ones placed inside, because there's that, you know, concept of germs and all of these kind of things. So this was an issue for us, in terms of we had lots of people that weren't using them, and we still had to take them out, and they'd be like, well, to my staff, would you like to take some shampoo home? Because, you know, that was part of our COVID cleanliness policy. So then we actually entered into a focus group with some of our customers, and we asked them, do you want toiletries? We said, this is the situation we're in. Quite a lot of you aren't using them. And actually we came back that 97% of our customers turned around and said, I take them when they're there, or I use them when they're there, but I don't actually need them because I travel with my shampoo and my shower gel. And there was a subset of those, about 40%, who said, well, I would never use them anyway because I don't know that I might not have an allergic reaction, or I particularly like my shampoo brand for my hair, all of these sorts of things. So as a result, we switched it to a on request model, which has cut our plastic waste by 1,200 miniature bottles in a year. Now, from an ethics standpoint, massive tick in the box. I can sit there and I can say we have significantly reduced our plastic waste, we've significantly improved our ESG credentials, but actually from a cost perspective, that has removed, I can't remember the exact total figure, but it works out at about £2.50 per weekly guest in cost, and that over 5 apartments over a year does actually add up quite a lot, particularly because our average length of stay isn't a week, it's actually 3 days. So, you know, I'm changing guests every 3 days, I'm changing bottles every 3 days, and we went through that. And that was because we were driven for B Corp. B Corp said, well, go and do something with this data. We've also reduced client car use by 30% traveling to us, and by 70% when in destination. The only thing we've done is to provide them with really comprehensive guides of how to get everywhere by public transport. And they found that really useful, and they save on parking, and we've just kind of spun that to their benefit. But 30% less people are now traveling to us via car, and they're using their car 70% less when they're here. To put that in perspective, we applied for planning permission to do this. Under national planning, you must have it in our location, you must have 2 parking spaces per flat. And we have 5 flats, so that meant we needed at least 10. We do not have space for 10 car parking spaces. We absolutely do not. And our local town council has an overriding, I can't remember what they call it, but it's a sustainability framework for planning applications. And there is another service department operator that is the opposite end of the road from us. And we applied for planning permission and it went through with not enough car parking spaces, which legally they were supposed to demand of us, and it went through first time. The service department operator at the other end of the road is on their third appeal, and they still haven't got their planning permission. And the big difference between the two of us is our commitment to sustainability. We were able to demonstrate that we do not need 10 car parking spaces, and we have never ever, on 5 flats, we have never been fully booked on parking spaces, even when we're full on occupancy. So there's lots of tangibles that have come out of that I can't say to you this is the impact on profit or this is the impact on our bottom line or anything like that, but I can say that they all add up to those savings. So every time we do something in one area, it improves something else we weren't expecting, and that's huge.
It's a great story, and I think I was guilty of thinking that B Corp was only for quite large companies as well. So it's great to hit that you can achieve it with as few as 5 apartments and reap the benefits. So it's good to hear. Let's talk a bit about the energy performance of a building, because it's not only good for the planet. It's if you can cut your costs, it's good for the bottom line of the business as well. And let's start by talking about how technology can improve asset performance. Lizzy, can you talk to us a bit about what is standard technology now in an operational real estate building, and how that might be evolving to make the buildings and the operations more efficient?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's no doubt that technology for energy management in buildings has increased, developed rapidly over the last few years, whether that's smart meters or energy management systems or light sensors. There's a whole range of different technologies that are out there, and they really help teams within the assets to really monitor energy consumption better, and to be able to control their energy consumption and to optimize their energy usage. So they're really, really important tools in improving efficiency and managing energy. But I guess what's kind of, and they are very expensive to invest into as well. Some of them, if you're looking at BMS systems, can be several hundreds of thousands of pounds, depending on the complexity of the system and the scale of it. But what we quite often see is that it's not just enough to invest in the technology, which is there and obviously helps do its job, but it's also very important to invest in training teams on how to use that technology. So a sensor will let you know when something's happening in a building, but if the staff aren't aware of how to interpret that data or how to act on that data, then it falls short, basically. You're not really maximising the potential of that technology. And also when it comes to budgeting for it, it's important to factor in things like upkeep and maintenance of these systems. So they will need periodic updating and maintenance as well, which can be costly to consider. So they are definitely a positive thing, but it's there are costs incurred with it. And I think as well, which is kind of common across every sort of aspect of sustainability, there is a sort of a balanced trade-off almost, which you have to look at on a case-by-case basis. So whereas some technologies, for example, some modern HVAC systems are very efficient, they also release more refrigerants than water-cooled systems. So it's kind of looking at each technology on a case-by-case basis and kind of using your best judgment to identify whether, what the balance is and which one on balance works out best for your business and for obviously ESG credentials. So and also there's obviously there's definite ROI, and if you invest in those technologies, then improving optimization, improving operational efficiency can obviously improve your ROIs. However, it's important not just to consider ROI as kind of an end goal. It's also, you have those broader sustainability goals. It's important to consider how these technologies can also help to achieve those goals.
Are we starting to see economies of scale kick in, Lizzy, on this technology as it adoption of it becomes more widespread, or is it still a prohibitive cost for a lot of people? Yeah,
as adoption increases and as advancements happen, there is definitely cost impact on that, and costs do decrease. It depends very much on the sector and on the developments happening there. So you look at, heat source pumps now are kind of, obviously now that the adoptions become wider, they are dropping in price, but it's still, technology still can be fairly costly. But it's about having that wider sort of, budgeting, not just for the initial technology, but also for the training, the planning, design and installation of them can be quite costly as well. Then you've got the maintenance as well. So there's a whole, it's not just the initial outgoings for the technology that needs to be considered.
Saroush, from what you were saying earlier, it's clear that you do a lot of measurement across your properties. Can you tell us a bit about that and the role that technology plays in measuring the performance of the buildings that you're operating?
Of course, it has been a big challenge, especially for our first year measurement. We had to go through tons of invoices and billings because we didn't have a live sort of measurement in our housing to see where we are with energy consumption, gas and electricity. I think technology plays a really important role. So basically live meters, for example, or like Lizzy mentioned as well, the BMS system, the smart BMS system will enable to actually monitor the live usage either via half-hourly data from the supplier or actually lively monitoring your meters that are connected to your meters in the housing. Another technology that I wanted to discuss is the voltage optimizers. They can save costing as well as energy up to 10 to 13%, and the payback time is quite reasonable. But obviously, there's all that factor of maintenance as well, which Lizzy already mentioned, which is way less than solar panels and the other renewable ones. Another thing that I wanted to mention is the building energy rating audit. That would give a good indication of what rating is of the building, of the housing, and also where you can actually save. Following the audit, you will receive advice on how to reduce the waste, the energy waste, and how you can actually reduce your emission. And yeah, that's all from my side.
Thank you, Saroush. While we're on the topic of the cost of implementing some of these measures, we've got a question in from Steve Lowy, so it's probably a good time to address this one now. Steve asks, with governments pulling back on their net zero goals, do you think this will lead to less push from corporates requiring detailed ESG or sustainability plans in order to book service department brands, and therefore reducing the intrinsic value of investing in ESG as an operator? Lizzy, do you want to kick off with that one?
So I just unmute myself. Yes. Yes, I think, obviously, yes, they have pushed back on withdrawn on certain things, but I think the key point is that whilst this governance here is what's happened, I think it's important to think about future-proofing your business, really. And so, as we can see, there is legislation coming in and regulations coming in from everywhere. And I think by being proactive and proactively investing in ESG and future-proofing your business against future risk and future legislation that might come through, I think it's still really important. And I think whereas you might not necessarily be impacted by legislation such as CSRD or whatever at the moment, it is coming. I don't think this is going to go away. Obviously, you've got demand from consumers, you've got legislation coming into play, you've got lots of different net zero goals, etc. So I don't think by people can sort of really rest on their laurels. I think you have to keep on being proactive, and you don't want to be behind the curve on this. I think it's quite important to stay ahead of the game. It's not going to go away.
Victoria, did you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, sorry, I was actually just typing an answer. I thought they were coming through to me, which is why I was being super efficient in answering them, because it looks to me as if they're tagged for me. So sorry, I didn't mean to be outspoken on all the questions. But the other part for Lizzy's point about regulation is hugely there. Just because they're rolling back on net zero doesn't mean that they're rolling back on legislation. But the other part of it for me is the fact that a lot of ESG is not being driven by government, it's being driven by consumers. You know, the stats are showing that consumers will actively choose a more sustainable product, and they are prepared to pay a small premium for that, or a lot of them are prepared to pay a small premium for that. my answer would be, why wouldn't you? We've saved money on our overheads that mean we can still charge a competitive price and make a bigger margin than some of our competitors, and then it's a tick in the box for a customer. They can go, well, I stayed somewhere that was a bit more sustainable, so done. So the businesses are able to just say, well, yes, we've aligned that with our supplier. It doesn't matter how committed they are to it. It is a quick win for them, and I get to be that quick win.
I also think the investment community aren't going to roll back on their ESG push now they've gone this far down the road, even if governments.
They're making a lot more money, you know, on ESG stuff at the moment.
Sarush, last question on energy saving measures. How do you engage with the end users in your apartments, the students, the service apartment guests, the corporate guests? How do you engage with them, and how do you educate them about using less energy during their stay?
Of course, yeah. So really, we include company ESG practices, policies and practices, and tips on how to make their stay more sustainable in the welcome packs, company website, through blogs, as well as platforms that we are advertised on. We also include updates on in our newsletters, maybe through webinars as well, that we do often. The workshop that we do for the students, we often do workshop every bi-weekly. And also, finally, if obviously apps are a really good idea. We're not there yet, but if there's an app for the residents, they could receive notifications and showing how they can save the environment and do more good and give back to the society and community as well. And finally, having a social calendar, it would be a really great idea. And that's what we do as well by celebrating every day. Could be a social event, could be an environmental event, but both, either way, just reminds the guests as well as the students to just, you know, be more conscious about their choices that they make on day-to-day basis. I mean, it doesn't have to be a big choice, big change, but obviously, if choice A is more sustainable than choice B, why not go in with choice A with a little bit of a premium? Yeah, thank you.
It's an interesting point you make about the apps. There was one of the companies that makes white label apps for residents in the build to rent and student space did some research in the PBSA market where bills are all inclusive, and they were educating students about how much carbon is saved if they turn their thermometers down by 1 degree and 2 degrees, and the results.
Exactly. These little comments would actually grab the attention of the students as well as the guests as well. Like Victoria mentioned as well, that I mean, the market is changing, so there's a big shift, and they want to see what you actually do for your sustainability. So by showing all of these savings, or you will be able to get somewhere. And also, additionally, if they are conscious about the emission and energy use, then obviously it's good for your bottom line as well for the operator.
Yeah, thanks, Sarush. Okay, let's move on and talk a bit about the S of ESG. And Stephen, I want to ask you, what measures can operators take to promote guest health and wellness during their stay?
Okay, Sarush touched on it during his last answer to a degree, where you have information packs in each apartment unit when a guest arrives. Now, of course, we shouldn't suggest that these should be paper information packs. We should suggest that they should be digital. And a lot of providers are actually successfully doing that. They're moving across from paper or card information packs to digital, to apps. So, of course, that's the opportunity to educate, to encourage, to show what your company is doing to help save the planet, and to encourage the guests to follow. And you're able to give them some tips on what they can do, such as turning light switches off, etc., etc. So that's one way. But in the structure of the accommodation itself, there are lots of other considerations, and this really touches on one of the certifications that we do, quality and comfort, and this really does link into guest well-being. So when selecting blocks of apartments or individual apartments, providers should consider ventilation. You know, you don't want to be in a dark and dingy basement with no natural daylight and no natural ventilation. That's clearly against any promotion of guest health or well-being during the stay. Similarly, the heating needs to be efficient. It needs to be available. It needs to be working. It needs to be simple to operate. There needs to be privacy. No overlooking, make sure the blinds and curtains are adequate for the function. There needs to be plenty of space. If you've got somebody on an assignment for 3 months, then, I mean, that's why people choose serviced accommodation, right? It's not a hotel room because there's more space. So give them the space, make it work for them, make it so that they thrive in the space while they stay with you. Work from home facility, standards of comfort. Security needs to there needs to be confidence in the security that's in place in each of one of these apartment units. And of course, as we've touched on previously, Victoria touched on it, good example, the use of sustainable supplies. So I think all of these things are what operators can consider and can and deploy to make a better environment for guests to stay.
Thanks, Steve. Lizzy, how can operators better integrate with and support their surrounding communities?
Yeah, there's a range of ways, and obviously integrating with the community is really important. You only have to sort of look across to what's happening at the moment in the Balearics and the Canary Islands and see the sort of descent amongst the local communities against tourism and how it's impacting on visitor numbers. So it's really important to integrate well within the community and support the local community in which you operate. Not only just to build goodwill and strengthen relationships, but also in terms of boosting the economy in which you're operating, also reducing your carbon footprint by sourcing your goods and services locally, and also from the flip side of having an improved guest experience. So guests are increasingly seeking experiential experiences, getting a sense of place in the community in which they're visiting. So by promoting the local community within your properties, you're really enhancing the guest experience as well. So there's basically there's a few ways obviously you can do it. You can local sourcing, I've mentioned, and local supply chains. You could prioritize hiring from within the local community, offering maybe training or internships or apprenticeships amongst the local community. Also serving to promote local businesses and organizations within your properties. So and partnering with local charities and organisations. And also I think what's important as well is to have that community feedback and dialogue with the local community, enabling them to be able to give their feedback and for the hotel to be able to then, the apartment to be able to look at how this can be addressed for any issues that come up. One of our long-term clients that we work with, Eden Group, they've done brilliant work in really integrating into their local communities. Each property they operate has a community engagement plan, which involves local suppliers. They have co-working spaces where the local community can come in and work. They have pop-ups for local businesses within their properties. They get involved in charity work. They have a whole range of things, silent discos, art exhibitions, lots of events that brings the community and the guests together. So yeah, they're a great example of really integrating and supporting the local communities in which they operate.
Thanks, Lizzy. And the next point under the S, Victoria, how can operators create a positive and inclusive work environment for their employees? It sounds like this area was quite a big piece of the B Corp process.
Yeah, and this was definitely our weakest area before going through B Corp, not because we weren't doing some good things, but because we just didn't ever measure it. We don't have a big team. We're only 5 apartments, so there's only a small number, but having policy and then following that policy through is massive. So when I was introduced to it by the consultant that we were using, of things like the gender pay gap and the high to low pay ratio and real living wage employer, these things that we've attained and now measured, one of the things that he said is that he pointed out is the number of businesses that have been measuring this for years and doing absolutely nothing about it. So, for example, Amazon published their gender pay gap something like 7-8 years ago, and every year it is still the same. And their point was, if you identify this problem, you need to follow it through. So you've got to decide if you want to be an employer of choice, if you want to be an ethical employer that looks after their team, and that is a conversation. You know, you can opt to be a minimum wage employer, you can opt to be a real living wage employer. These are conversations that you need to have. But finding a framework that supports employees. So for us, the B Corp governance section did that, but there is Investors in People, there are several other accreditations. It was amazing what we didn't know until somebody started asking us questions on it, and then we were able to go, well, actually, we've always been transparent about the salary band for every job that we have within all of our businesses. So we just carry that through, and it turns out that that's a really great thing. We were then able to go through a commitment to be a real living wage employer. These are lots of steps that are available to people, but it requires you to engage in the conversation in the first place. And you've got to decide on it. And we're lucky in being as small as we are. I'm part of a business group where we, the directors of local businesses share some of their stories. And one of the businesses committed 2 years ago to being a real living wage employer. When that real living wage was shifted up in April, the bottom line cost to their company was £350,000. So it is not a small sum. So it is not, there's no shame in saying I can't attain that at the moment, or I'm working towards it. But the important thing for me is to be having those conversations in the first place and deciding what part of the line that you sit on. And my personal opinion is that you probably can't be an ESG-led business if you're not putting your people and also the people in your supply chain first. We also changed our supplier policy. So 94% of everything that we source now are from UK-based companies that have sole operations in the UK, of which 66%, I think, are within a 50-mile radius of us. So we shifted to local ethical suppliers, but we're really lucky in that the size that we are and the type of things that we source, that is an option for us. That was as a result of B Corp, and it hasn't really changed our overheads. It's just changed our relationships with our suppliers, because they also could match us in terms of the ethics of how they treat their people. That's a choice thing. There's not, I can't sit here and tell somebody that they should be a real living wage employer if that's adding £500,000 and they can't afford that margin. I think ethically it probably should be, but it is not a simple conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Victoria. We've actually come to the end of the hour. That's flown by. We've touched on the E and the S, but we've barely scratched the surface of the G. So that will have to be for a future session. But thanks everyone for your input. That was a really interesting discussion. Just going to show a couple of quick slides before we finish. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll leave the session open for a couple of minutes so you can take some notes from all the good stuff that's in the chat. So the Service Department webinar strand is going to take a short summer break, and we'll be back in September when my colleague Eloise will be hosting the first in the series, and that is about designing for flexibility. And you should be able to see the link to register for that in the chat. These are some of the webinars that we've previously hosted. You can see some interesting topics there. You can go to the webinar page on Service Department News and watch recordings of any of these. If they take your fancy, there's some really good stuff in there. They've all got some really great panels and some good insights. Again, the link to that page is in the chat. And a quick word about our flagship event, which is taking place in London on September the 18th and 19th, the Urban Living Festival. which covers the hospitality sectors, also the living and the flexible workspace sectors. We have just today, I believe, signed up ASAP as another one of our supporting partners, and there will be some service department content in that event. Strongly urge you to come along. It's going to be a great event. And again, the link to get tickets for that is in the chat. If you're interested in working with us at IHM on any of our digital or in-person events, get in touch with my colleague Piers, whose details you can see there. And finally, just want to say thank you. Thanks to the residents for sponsoring the series. Thanks to Lizzy, Sarush, Victoria and Stephen for their input today. Thanks to you all for watching, and we will see you on another webinar, probably in September. Take care, everyone. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hello, we are International Hospitality Media, or IHM for short. IHM is the #1 brand to engage with decision makers in hospitality and real estate. Our 4 multimedia brands lead their respective sectors with breaking news, comments, trends and opinion across a variety of multimedia solutions. We provide an inspirational community to connect people through world-class events, webinars, podcasts, award schemes and much more. But let us share our story of who we are and what we do. Over 10 years ago, Piers and George had a light bulb moment to provide expert opinion, comments and low-cost digital content. And so they went on a journey over the past decade, creating media platforms to serve the hospitality and real estate industries. We now have an engaged audience with a reach of over 60,000 monthly visitors across our website, 48,000 of our email database across all the sectors, and over 67,000 across our social channels. Everything we do believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. We make things simple and very easy to work with us. And we're a friendly bunch too. We offer creative solutions to help you achieve your business goals. Read, watch, listen, meet with IHM. Contact us for a chat today. Just look at some of the brands we have worked with recently.